Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me and welcome. Today, I want to chat a bit about Thoughts from the Dark Corner, selected essays and other writings by J.P. Pereira. This book I became aware of because the author actually commented on one of my other videos and, mentioned that mentioned this book and thought that I might find the book interesting because of given the other types of books that I've done chats on, and so I decided to look it up on Amazon, and so I checked it out there, and there wasn't a lot of reviews and things, so I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. But ultimately, I decided, that it sounded like it would fit in with my general reading plan right away. It reminded me of The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard that I did a video chat on not that long ago, because it's divided up into three different sections. The sections are doors, walls, and mirrors. So that sort of reminded me of the Poetics of Space book. And, I decided to take a chance on it, and I'm really glad that I did, because it was one of those gifts from the universe where you take a risk, a little risk, you don't, and you pick up a book that you're not sure about, you're not familiar with the author, but yet you take that chance and reach out to it and get a big reward for it. And this was one of those experiences for me. So I'm super glad that I read this book. It is a collection of philosophical literary essays, and I have the feeling that I'm going to be coming back to it periodically, from now on. So the book was not available electronically, so I did get a print copy, but I am going to keep this copy handy to refer to in the future, and definitely in for a future reread. But, I kind of was wondering how to structure this chat, because when you're, dealing with essays, I thought, well, maybe I could just pick out several of the essays and go into those. Each of the essays are about maybe 4 or 5 pages at the most. But yet, in that little short amount of short space, there is a lot of information. There is a lot to think about. There is a lot of beauty. It's written really well. It's written really beautifully. And ultimately, I decided to let my book chat muse take over. In one of the essays called "Sea Jelly Us," the author actually talks about how everyone needs to have a connection to muses. You know how I normally think of a muse as like an artist, like an artist or a painter or a musician or something has this muse, this inspiration from outside of themselves. But the author makes the point that really everybody should get connected with their muse. So I thought, okay, well, I'll quit overthinking how to do this chat and just sort of flow with it and let my book chat muse take over. But I did want to start out the chat with a discussion, a quote from the essay "Sea Jelly Us," because I thought this quote was so beautiful, and it also, I felt, really sort of exhibits the tone of all of the essays, and also sort of shows the type of beauty of the writing that is present throughout all the essays, and it's just and also the complexity of the thought and the sort of the content that's there that gives us a lot to think about. So in the essay "Sea Jelly Us," the author is actually observing, in an aquarium, observing a tank of sea jellies, jellyfish, and observing their movements and their, sort of contemplating their existence. And then we have this quote: "A beautiful creature blind to its own beauty, a creature with more poetry in its being than is within the power of words to grasp, a creature whose own meaning eludes it, a creature moving, struggling, and living without quite knowing why it moves, struggles, and lives. A creature without a satisfactory story for why it even bothers to be. No, not the sea jelly. You know of whom I speak." Because, of course, he's speaking about us. So that sort of existential thinking is really throughout all of the essays. And some of the other essays, like I just thought I'd go through just kind of a few of them, just the title of them and a bit about them, just so that you can sort of have an idea of what the essays are about. So the one essay is called On Understanding, and in this essay, the author's talking about understanding with the capital U as opposed to understanding with the little u. And so, and this is talking about like how people a lot of times want to make a quick decision, especially in this kind of information age that we're in right now, where we get a lot of information and we have a question maybe, and we have the answer to that question right on our fingertips, and then we say, okay, well now I understand that, even though it's a very superficial understanding instead of the big U understanding. So I enjoyed that essay immensely. There's another essay called Prolixity. I had to look that word up. It means excessive wordiness, but I thought that was cool. This essay was cool because it was very beautifully written in sort of a style of the 19th century, maybe like Charles Dickens, and it really brought to mind, and it makes the point of how our language used today in writing when we read, how efficiency is valued. So efficiency of language rather than the sort of flowing sentences that we read when we read something from like the 18th or 19th century, sort of a completely different vibe. So that was a very playful, yet it was a playful essay, yet gave me a lot to think about. Then there was an essay called On Sickness. So on sickness is when is sickness a joy? And so this essay sort of explores that, sort of like the sickness actually gives a person an excuse to be passive in an active world. We live in this active world where activity is not only expected, is required with work and etc. And sickness sort of gives an excuse for passivity in this otherwise active world, among other things in this essay. So each of these essays, I'm giving just the most superficial description of it, just so that you have an idea of sort of what they're about. There was another essay called Do You Get It? Like, have you ever heard that? I always hear that, especially a lot of times around movies. Like when someone goes and sees a movie and then someone else comments like on social media, oh, that movie was so boring. And then the other person goes, well, you obviously didn't get it. Get it. Some people want their messages spoon-fed to them, so you didn't get it. Or artwork, like a lot of times going into a museum, like, oh, I didn't get that piece. Because we always have this tendency to want to get something. Like there is a ultimate truth to whatever art form there is, and of course there's really not. But that essay was very informative and gave me a lot to think about as well. Well, they all do. Then another essay, one of the essays was called The One Mortal Sin. And the one mortal sin, I'll give you a second. What do you think the one mortal sin in the author's view is? It's actually failure. But it's not failure the way you think. It's not failure the way it might seem on the surface. It's actually the failure to incorporate failure into your life narrative. So there's a lot more to that concept of failure that's explored in this essay. It was very pleasant. It was very informative to read that, and I realized reading that I have failures in my life that I've actually that I've actually dead-ended and not incorporated into myself, and I really need to give that some more thought. So another title is called On the Tyranny of Praise, and this is about praise, obviously, but I love that title, On the Tyranny of Praise, the tyranny of praise. So true, so much to think about in that essay as well. In the essay on its self-implosion, I love this essay too, because this essay was all about how the moment when we stop expanding, when we stop, moving, when we stop trying to become a different person, is the moment we start to self-implode. And the author makes the point in this essay where, this is a tendency for people to do, like think they've reached a pinnacle of I am now who I am, and explore no further, and then begin to slowly sort of stagnate and self-implode, because he makes the argument here that, the ultimate sort of case of a person is to be in constant movement. The ultimate purpose of a person is to be in constant movement. And the moment that you stop moving is the moment that you start to self-implode. And I've seen this in my own experience and around aging. Some people that I've known, as that they've gotten older, have begun the process. Begun the process of sort of self-implosion, I think, as described in this essay. So there was a lot to think about there. Another essay is called Thoreau's Insight. Thoreau, Walden Pond, and that explores that paradox of the person who continues to inflate their needs, like make sure they need more money, they need a bigger house, they need this and that. That actually, the more you try, the more you need, the more that you're reduced to sort of a subsistence level of existence, because that's what your focus becomes, sort of maintaining that that level of need, rather than trying to reduce your needs to expand and live above subsistence. So this essay explores that topic along with Thoreau. So finally, to close, I'm going to run out of time, but back to the Sea Jelly Us. I think that a recurring theme throughout all of these essays is exploring, the art of living and, how to live. And just like the sea jelly, in this essay of the sea jelly, the author is sort of wondering, does the sea jelly wonder, why it's struggling, why it moves against the current in this, it's so flimsy and so fragile out in the dangerous world. And, who is it? Does it wonder who it is, or why it's moving, or why it does what it does? And ultimately, I think that's the struggle of a human as well, to just sort of figure out, who am I, why am I here, what am I doing here, and just making becoming more aware and expanding sort of my way of being, or my art of living, ultimately, while I'm alive. So, and this connects to several other books that I've read, and I really love this sort of idea of exploring, the good life. What does it mean to have a good life? And part of that's I think connecting with the muse of living and learning how to live well. So, and essays like this are a great tool and just a joy to read. So I'll leave it at that. Until next time, take care. Bye.